Hey guys, I'm Mel and today I'm going to do the Try a Chapter Tag Argentinian edition. So On Voices October is starting in a few days, and as I said in my last video, that was my part 1 of my TBR. And this is my part 2. I want to try some books that are from my country, from Argentina, because I want to read more books from here, especially taking advantage of this month that celebrates diverse voices. And I know it's something that I've been postponing for the longest time. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience. I was born here, I live here, and if you're wondering why my channel is in English, I mostly read books in English, and also I started my channel when I was living in London. So it was something that made sense to me. Having my channel in English makes me connect with people from all over the world. So it's definitely something that I don't regret. I am exposed to books in English. The books that people recommend are in English. I mean, I did read a lot of Latin American books. Reading more books in Spanish is something that I've been wanting to do for a while. It makes me nervous and I don't really know why, because it's a language I use to communicate with my family, with my friends. So this for me relates to On Voices, because I believe On Voices is something that is very personal. It's something that I realized speaking with a lot of people, speaking with Katie, who is hosting this readathon with me, speaking with my sister, who has a complete different experience. And On Voices is something that is so new that it's hard to explain it sometimes. Inside of Argentina you have a lot of different types of privileges. I always say that On Voices is something that you should see it globally. I want to take advantage of this month to understand it a lot more. So the Try a Chapter tag is a tag where you try a chapter and decide what book to read next. I plan to read all of these books in October. I just want to know what book I'm going to read first. The first book that I'm going to try is Los Siete Locos by Roberto Art. This translates as The Seven Crazy Men, and this is about a guy who has a lot of debt and doesn't have any money, so he joins this association that relates to a revolution, I think. So Roberto Art is an author that I've read a lot about, but I read mostly news articles or chronicles because I had to study his work when I was studying journalism, because he is a journalist and I've always thought that he was genius. The next book is Te Digo Más by Fontana Rosa. This translates as Let Me Tell You Something Else, or something like that. Like, this is not a direct translation. This is a short story collection, but I think the main story is about a guy who loses his job, then he finds this side job just to get some money that involves him dressing up as Santa Claus or Father Christmas or whatever you call him. We have Christmas in summer, so it's very hot and I'm sure he won't have a nice time. The next book that I want to read is Fenómenos de Circo by Ana Maria Shua. This translates as Circus Freaks, and this is actually a short story collection, very short stories about this circus, and apparently this circus has like some peculiar things. So the next book I want to read, I made a mistake and the author is actually from Uruguay, so sorry about that, but Uruguay is very similar to Argentina. I could like sneak it there anyways, because I'm actually very excited about reading this. And that is Gracias por el Fuego by Mario Benedetti. This translates as Thanks for the Fire. Mario Benedetti is the author of one of my most favorite poems and I want to read more from him, and I never read a book by him. I don't really know what this is about because it doesn't say, it just says that it's a story about death. At the same time, it chronicles a moral crisis and the courage to speak up. When I was coming up with these books, I actually went and looked for them. And the thing is that I was in the bookshop and I had a little crisis, because basically I had all men authors in general. I know mostly Latin American men authors. I was kind of freaking out, and then I found Circus Freaks, but that wasn't enough, especially because Argentina is a very male-driven country. So I'm going to read Los Días del Venado by Liliana Bodoc. This translates as The Days of the Deer, and this is one of the only fantasy novels that I've heard that is written by an Argentinian woman. I've heard really good things about it, and I've heard really good things about the author. I'm just excited to see how it goes, because I've read a lot of fantasy in general, but I've never read fantasy from Latin America. I just read magical realism. I believe there is a war in this book between good and evil, of course. So I've just finished the first chapter of Circus Freaks, and it's not really a chapter, it's a short story, and I read like the prologue and the first short story. In that prologue it says that when people go to the circus, you have that urge to see people devoured by the lion or people falling into their death, and this circus serves that desire. So it sounds very creepy, but it sounds very interesting as well. The next book that I'm going to read is Let Me Tell You Something Else. So like I said, this is a collection of short stories, and the first story is called Mom, and it's about this guy whose mom raised him, but the thing is that he starts noticing little things about her, like how much he likes to drink, how addicted she is to the cigarettes, and she keeps saying that that is the only vice that she has. And the thing is that he keeps noticing other things, like how much he likes to gamble, but there are a lot of dichotomies as well, like how much he likes to go and help the people in hospitals. The thing is that later he finds out that when she goes and helps the sick in the hospital, she plays with them, she gambles with them. Her mother doesn't make a big deal out of it, and I thought it was extremely funny. It's something that I expect from him, because this author was very funny. He was a comedian, but I didn't expect how well this was written. Next, I'm going to read The Seven Crazy Men. So the first chapter was very short. It was just one page, and the only thing that we see is that this guy doesn't have any money and people are trying to pin him into a theft. It was interesting, but it was so short that I couldn't really get excited about it. Still really want to read this, but I don't know when I'm going to read it. Next, I'm going to read The Days of the Deer by Liliana Bodoc. So the first chapter was interesting. It sets up the world in a very different way. I think I don't know if it's because I'm reading The Obelisk Gate. That book is very fantasy heavy, so I don't know if it's because of that, and I'm very into that one, but I believe that this one is very generic fantasy. Something that I've read before, and in the prologue it talks about how Death had a child and how they loved it. It's something that I've read before. I'm still going to read it and see how it evolves. At the same time, it had a lot of diverse characters, of course, because it's from Latin America. And the final book that I'm going to read is Thanks for the Fire. So this first chapter takes place in Broadway, like Broadway, New York. In there, a lot of people from Uruguay meet in this restaurant, and it's like how people think that they should all be friends because they are all from the same country. It was very interesting to read. It was nicely written. So for sure, the book that I'm most excited to read is Let Me Tell You More. Definitely the best writing. It's the way I want to read books in Spanish. I realized that I read much slower in Spanish, so it's like something that I have to practice more. So yeah, that was my try a chapter tag. Hope it was interesting, and I'm going to do a wrap up of these books in October for Unweighted October. That's everything. Hope you like this. If you didn't subscribe, I also want to see you. Bye!